All right, so I guess we are live. So
Mark Graban and Jamie Flinchbaugh are two guys drinking whiskey while chatting about lean ideas, experiences, and news. Let's hope they hold their liquor because they're not holding back on sharing their opinions. It's time for Lean Whiskey, Lean Talk with a fun spirit.
Welcome everybody. I guess this is the official start. This is the start of our experiment. This is episode 15 of the Lean Whiskey podcast. I'm Mark Graban, and we also have...
And I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh.
And I guess you know that if you're watching and you see our faces and our names together here on screen, but this is definitely an experiment tonight. This is our first video episode. This is also our first live streaming episode. So, I guess part of that experiment is will my internet be strong enough tonight? Because people are now starting to watch Netflix and whatever in our condo building. And I don't know what happens if you throw a live broadcast and no one shows up, Jamie.
Well, it'd be the same as the rest. We talk to each other and have whiskey. So I think the bottom of the experiment isn't really that bad of a bottom, at least for us.
Yeah. Well, hey, we have at least two people here. We've got Bradley Miller, we've got Chris Burnham. So thank you and cheers, and thanks for joining us. So we'll ask the live attendees. Feel free to submit questions using the chat box on the live broadcast here. Jamie and I plan on spending more time on Q&A. We're going to spend a little bit of time chatting, a little bit of time on whiskey. We're going to talk about what our work life means to us right now. And then instead of news stories and other things, we're going to do more Q&A back and forth. Right, Jamie?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have a little less, I guess it's really three experiments in one, since we have a little less structure and preparation on this one, since we're planning on responding to questions. These aren't our last experiments. These aren't our first experiments. But I thought it was an appropriate time to give it a shot.
Yeah, and instead of a shot, we're going to be sipping our whiskey as usual.
We heard neither one of us are shot downers. We're generally whiskey sippers or drinkers or tasters in that regard.
So Jamie's already poured his. I was going to pour mine on camera since we have that option, and we'll talk about what the others are drinking. But before we get to the pour, I'm sitting here in Florida. Liquor stores are open as quote unquote essential services, which, I guess I'm stocked up enough. That's kind of interesting to me that's considered essential. But what's the situation in Pennsylvania, Jamie?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania, we've done shelter in place county by county. So we were pretty early because we were fairly near Philadelphia. So we were, right after California, I think, in terms of the shelter in place. But it did include liquor. Now Pennsylvania is known for the blue laws, and so we didn't always have the most liberal liquor policy as it is. The liquor stores themselves are all state owned, but yes, they are closed. Now we are only 90 minutes from the epicenter where I live. So I don't know if that's a reason to take greater precautions, but there's always ordering online, which I haven't done yet because, like you, I am quite well stocked to start off on.
Yeah. Here in Florida, there's been a lot of talk in the news about people flying down from New York down to their second homes. Now, I'm in Orlando. There might be more people along the coast and down in South Florida, but my wife and I have been staying at home. I've tried to really limit the grocery store trips. We have tried, though, to support a couple of local restaurants that are now in takeout food only mode. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to strike a balance between staying home and trying to stay safe versus going out rarely, but trying to do so in the smartest way that we can.
Yeah, we're family of five, and at least I have one of those underlying conditions they list. So we've been a little more conservative when terms comes to going out, just not taking any unnecessary risks. I actually went out only to the pharmacy today for routine pickup, but it's the first time I've run an errand myself in about 18 days. So, I mean, we're certainly buying groceries and a few things like that where we can, but largely just we're hanging out at home, doing our thing as a family, and school started again today, which was nice. Now, I mean, school at home, but at 8:30 each day, assignments drop. The rule is we want our kids all to start at 8:30 or at least close to it. We can't do anything else until all their schoolwork is done. It doesn't take them the full day, but then it's very clear that's the first priority. So so that's probably the biggest dose of added normalcy that we've had since we started this.
Yeah, and my wife and I, we don't have any kids, but it's the both of us working from home. I'm here in a bedroom office. She's taken up office on the couch out in the living room. But things have been very much closed down here in Orlando. It's been shelter in place for a couple of days. So liquor stores are open. I'm sorry to bring this up, Jamie, because I know you probably take care of this with the razor blade. Barbershops are closed, so my hair is getting to be longer than it has in a long time.
Yes, I've talked to a few people that suffer from that problem, as my kids are. My older son declared he wasn't going to shave until he went back to school, so we'll see what happens there. But no, I don't need a barber. It's been a long time for that. But those are I think somebody said in a few weeks we're going to find out everybody's natural hair color.
Yes. My wife and some of her friends were talking about that on a kind of Zoom happy hour the other night. So it's part of our new reality, but hey, we have our health. So cheers to that. And everyone who's listening who's doing okay. So maybe we'll talk about whiskey for a little bit, as we usually do at the start of the podcast. So Bradley Miller posted that he's drinking a Glenlivet 18 with a large clear cube, and knowing Bradley, he's probably got good standard work for making that super clear ice cube. So maybe I'll have to ask him about that sometime. And Chris Burnham is drinking a really nice Irish whiskey, Redbreast 12-year. I don't know Irish whiskeys that well, but Redbreast is one that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I know I've had it, but I don't think I've ever had a bottle at my house. So I've had a few Irish whiskeys in and out of my collection. Yellow Spot has always been one of my favorites, but I don't think I've had the Redbreast 12-year. I probably had a cheaper version of Redbreast at some point at a restaurant, but and we hope if there are other people in the chat, they share what they're drinking, if they are. By no means a requirement. Right. But we decided, as we do, pick a theme. And since we're sheltered in place, our theme is sheltered in place. So we're going to drink Pennsylvania and Florida whiskeys.
We'll keep it local. So, so I'm drinking Dad's Hat, which is a Pennsylvania-based rye distillery. Do you have the bottle? Don't forget we have video.
Yes, I actually do have the bottle.
Take advantage of the medium.
Take advantage. So there's the bottle. And so I went on a trip to visit them in person, because there's only one variety that I've ever seen in the store. And so I walked away with 3 bottles of different Dad's Hat varieties. But so this is the bottled and bond straight rye whiskey, 100 proof. Now these guys are, there's been a lot of ryes coming up, but a lot of them do a lot of tempering of the rye spice with a lot of corn mash and maybe some malted barley. But these guys go really back to some, I'll say traditional Pennsylvania values when it comes to producing rye. So I don't know if it's their typical or their only grain bill, but they do 80% rye, which is high even for a rye, 50% barley malt, and 5% rye malt. This particular one, they aren't all aged 5 years, but this particular one's aged 5 years, which does make a difference. Mm-hmm. It's right outside Philly in a town called Bristol. And interestingly, I don't know if they get all their rye from this farm or just the bulk of it or some of the new stuff. But the farm that they use to get most of their rye from is about a mile from my house. And so I haven't spotted which it's on the road it's on there's plenty of farms. So I haven't spotted which farm exactly it is, but I am going to have my eyes open to see exactly where it comes from. But it's pretty refined. I think the age helped. Even though it's 100 proof, it's really not a ton of heat. It doesn't hit you like a ton of bricks, like a lot of 100 proofs will. It's got plenty of that, that spice that you expect from a rye. So it's got very good traditional rye flavors, along with some fruit without the sweetness. So not as much sweet fruit that you get maybe in a bourbon, but you get some fruit in there. At least I do as well. But it's ever since I got it, I've enjoyed several ryes. I really like the Whistle Pig. But I have to say this Bottled and Bond Dad's Hat, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's one of my top ryes for sure. I'll have to go back and get some more. Yeah.
And a lot of the trendy bourbons in the last couple of years have been the Bottled and Bond selections. They're always 50% ABV or 100 proof. And there's kind of a long, interesting history about bonded warehouses and bottled and bond and like not having to pay tax on it, I think. And it's all got to be made in a single year. I think it's one of the other rules.
Definitely one of the rules.
Just going off of memory.
All has to be from the same year. Is government, sort of guaranteed, if you will, and it has to, be distilled at a certain proof or not above a certain proof, go into the barrel at a certain proof.
Yeah.
So there are a whole bunch of requirements, and from what I understand, it was kind of a way to guarantee. There's so much bad whiskey back in the day. It was a way to kind of say, okay, here's a little bit of a government guarantee of meeting a certain threshold, because especially Canadian whiskey at the time, I don't want to disparage it today, they just throw in stuff to add color, right? Anything to add color, but it was pretty much just white lightning with some, coloring added, and call it whiskey. So
last time I was in Kentucky, trying to think which tour it was. So, I did tour Michter's, which I think has origins and history going back to Pennsylvania. I think it was originally a Pennsylvania distiller. It went bankrupt. It was out of business for a long time. And then somebody basically bought the name and started using it in Kentucky. So some origins there. Chris Burnham commented in the chat, the Bottle and Bond was an attempt to standardize whiskey quality, but one of the distilleries I visited, Old Forester, that's what it was. They claimed to be the first to bottle bourbon, that before you would go and basically bring your own jug and dip it out of a barrel or something. And back then, they I think in the tour, they talked about how people would use, like at best, things like tobacco juice to darken the whiskey and make it look aged or like it had been aged longer. Or there were things that were quite often poisonous, like gunpowder and other things that you wouldn't want to be ingesting. So thankfully, we can trust that what we're drinking now is unadulterated.
Yeah, and what's interesting about rye is that in addition to rye whiskey disappearing for quite a while, for the most part, rye bread has disappeared. And so, it used to be, incredibly popular. Rye bread was just an easy bread, and white bread basically put rye bread out of business. And a lot of very specific varieties of rye grain have essentially gone extinct. And so Dad's Hat is actually working with I always forget if it's called the National Seed Depository, or it's basically where they keep seeds in case there is some type of apocalyptic event where we can't grow where we lose our entire crops. But it's like a library. They have all these different things. So they've tried a few new ones, a few old ones, I should say, bringing them back. And they're a few years away from the actual grains being mature enough to distill, but they are in the process of growing varieties of grain that have been off the market for a long, long time. So really looking forward to see what happens there.
So how are you, hold up your glass? How are you drinking this? This is a certain glass you normally use.
So it's one I use more than anything, one of my two Norlands. So or two styles of Norlands. This is the Norland tumbler. It's the heaviest glass I've ever picked up in my life.
Yeah.
It's just got this massive base, thick walls. It's got ribs on the inside and the bottom, which are going to be impossible to see, that are meant to help sort of agitate a bit the whiskey. And so as a tumbler, this is easily my favorite. And then I also have, when I'm really into tasting, I have the other Norland glass. I forget what it's called, but it really, I think, is. I've done side-by-side comparisons, and it makes a difference.
It's shaped vaguely more like this Glencairn glass that I'm using.
Yeah, right? More on the inside, though. It's interesting.
Inside.
It's like there's an inside and an outside layer in how it's formed, and it's more of an acrylic rather than a crystal. So I don't enjoy the feel in my hand as much as this. But the tasting experience is better. Chris is asking what watch I'm wearing to match the whiskey glass. So it doesn't match the whiskey glass, but I will say I'm wearing a Pennsylvania-made 1961 Hamilton.
There you go.
So keeping it Pennsylvania at the very least.
So I'm not wearing a watch. I'm like totally of the phone. Check your time on the phone generation. I wear a Fitbit occasionally. Jamie is still friends with me anyway, right?
Yes, I am. To each their own.
Put on my.
I enjoy my my hobbies my own way. So
yeah.
So that's my Pennsylvania tasting. What's your Florida tasting?
So I'm drinking a Florida. What would you guess by looking at it, Jamie? What?
That looks like syrup. That's some dark color.
It's pretty dark color.
Yep. So that's definitely some extra finishing on a bourbon.
Good call. By the way, Bradley says he's got his grandfather's Hamilton. So you get we'll do a breakout room sometime. You guys can talk about whiskey, or watches. So this is a St. Augustine Distillery port finished bourbon. So the listeners on the audio podcast don't get the benefit of looking at it, but I've tried a lot of Florida whiskeys in the 3+ years I've been here. Some of them are good. The beauty of whiskey is that I think you can make it well just about anywhere, unlike wine.
Right.
And I think this one really is my favorite. So it's 51% ABV, so it's one higher.
Yep.
And then Jamie's. It's I looked up the mash bill. It's 60% corn, 22% malted barley.
Okay.
Which the distillery says is somewhat unusual to use malted barley. Malted barley, of course, have more the characteristics of Scotch, where I think a lot of American bourbons, they don't malt the bourbon. And again, I'm not a whiskey
Not themselves,
expert,
at least. Right.
so I could be wrong on that. But it's 18% wheat. So in a lot of cases, you might call this a wheated bourbon. It's been aged 3 years, and then it's been aged 6 months in port barrels from a Florida winery. It won a triple gold medal in the 2016 Micro Liquor Awards so congratulations to them for that. And I'm drinking it out of a Glencairn glass that has a little bit of kind of a pattern etched into it. So it's one of my favorite glasses. This is one to drink neat, I think.
Yeah, and there's very few in my collection that I don't drink neat with a little water added, which is how I had this. Did you add water to yours?
No, no, I like it just as it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I typically, especially with just bourbons, I add water a lot less frequently because it really depends on the oils and the interaction with the oils, and there's a lot less of that with I think a lot more with that with the scotches and the ryes are probably in between, at least my unprofessional experience. But so I've had a few port finished bourbons before, actually anything, including a Dad's Hat port finish rye, and I have to say it really does make a difference. I don't want to say you can taste the port, but the profile changes in a very predictable way.
It's got a sweeter profile, which I think balances the spice of the rye. Angel's Envy rye is finished in port barrels.
Okay.
And that's a fantastic rye. But then there's one that I've had, a Basil Hayden dark rye that literally they've added a little bit of port, like the actual liquid, and I think that's a little bit too much. I think the port barrel is a more subtle influence. But going back to the ice cubes thing, Bradley posted that I like I suspected. He says, I tried my own experiments on clear ice, and like a good lean guy, so he did experiments. He used to freeze an entire igloo cooler and chip away the clear pieces. But then he finally broke down and bought something called the True Cubes Clear Ice Cube Tray. He says it really works like it says in the ad. So.
Yeah, I do ice a little bit more in the summer, usually with a bourbon, and I use spheres, which are pretty nice. But yeah, I haven't done a lot of that. Mostly, I am quite aware that with my lack of travel, I'm actually probably drinking more. So I'm trying to take more sipping pours rather than drinking pours. So I do tend to distinguish at the beginning of the night, am I drinking whiskey or am I tasting whiskey, and approach the two differently. Yeah. Today might be a little in between.
Yeah. Well, hey, so I'm going to suggest, we did have some topics lined up to talk about, but Bradley, like a good lean guy, is asking questions. He posted a question here. Curious to hear your view on lean's role in the COVID recovery. And I don't know if we're ready. We're not quite in recovery. I think we're still in the middle of the crisis. So maybe, there's a way I could try to touch on this from a healthcare perspective. Jamie, I don't know if you've been following what some of the manufacturers are doing. There's an interesting response out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, it's probably less of following the news. I'm actually preparing a blog post. I don't know when it'll get out, because I've been advising a lot of lean teams on how they respond internally. What do they do? And so that blog post is coming out. But I certainly think that it depends on whether or not your mission is life critical. Hospitals making ventilators, testing centers, which still I don't know why we're talking more about masks than we are about testing, but we do not have control of this until we can test pretty much anybody that wants it rapidly.
Right. Well, and I have read about developments. I think the one was a 45-minute test, and I think I even read today about a 5-minte point of care test.
Yes, that is coming online next week. It's actually approved in Detroit, starting in Detroit. But I have no idea what the rollout plan is. They plan on 50,000 a day, which is a great start. That's awesome. And I think the other is, from a response standpoint, is how do we adjust our processes for those that still are in key businesses, right? They're whether it's a grocery store or manufacturing toilet paper or whatever else, how do they adjust to the changing conditions, whether it's changes in operations, changes in demand, changes in service consumption, right? So, my number one advice has just been understand the problems at hand and focus on solving those, right? So that's been my advice. I think not knowing where all the improvements come from, you've seen an awful lot of examples of that being shared. Some of them are very just pragmatic, they're not super creative. They're just, hey, we're going to stagger our shift every 2 minutes. A couple more people can check in. We're going to space out people at the doorway and do thermometer tests and stuff like that. So there's some basic fundamentals. And then others trying to reshape their production, change their business model to meet the demand of what they're facing today.
I mean, I saw one company that makes baseball jerseys for the retail market is instead making masks and gowns out of literally material that was going to be used to make replica fan jerseys. And these cloth masks are being used in hospitals these days. They don't stop COVID-19, but apparently they're being worn over the better protective masks to help the masks last longer.
Right.
There are companies that are like Bauer that makes hockey equipment and helmets is now making face shields for hospitals. So it's great to see organizations that are really being flexible this way to change their products and make something that's much needed. So you've got masks and gowns, ventilators. I think all the automakers are partnering with someone to try to make the ventilators.
Yep.
And I think the other thing that's fascinating, and since Jamie and I are both MIT guys, Chris Burnham's right. That company is called Fanatics that does the baseball jerseys.
Yeah, unfortunately, it includes Yankees pinstripes. So
there's Philly pinstripes in the one picture.
There's Philly and New York Yankees. So I guess you gotta accept the good with the bad.
Yeah, but it's a Pennsylvania company, so thank you for pointing that out, Chris. But so MIT is developed, and they've open sourced it, and there are plans available out there for people to get. Basically, so like ventilators normally cost something in the range of like a relatively inexpensive car. Very complex, electronic, complicated machinery. There's a group at MIT. It was an offshoot of a class, and there's actually an effort I heard about earlier, and I've blogged about it. A hospital in Minnesota partnered with a local engineering and manufacturing company to basically put together something that, instead of trying to recreate the expensive ventilators, they're basically taking what's called an ambi bag, which you may have seen on a TV show. You squeeze it manually. EMT might be using this. But the company in Minnesota and the effort at MIT has come up with a way of, I'm trying to awkwardly illustrate this with my hands, but in the mechanical way, just squeezing that bag.
Yep.
In a way that supposedly serves as a fairly effective ventilator. I think far better than saying, oh, it's better than nothing. So I think it's fascinating to see the kind of innovation where something that's maybe $100, orders of magnitude cheaper than the traditional ventilator. So I love to see that kind of creativity, whether it's coming out of MIT or collaboration between a hospital and a manufacturing company.
Yep. Yeah, and of course with a ventilator, you get the sensors and the other data that you need to do it as well as possible. Now again, solving problems at a systems level versus a spot level is, we can have all the ventilators we want. We don't have respiratory therapists, right, to help manage them, right? And so we have face masks more than we have ventilators. We don't have tests, so we aren't necessarily solving it well at a systems level. But everybody's doing what they can. I think just the point around, I didn't even intend this, but the point around respiratory therapists is, we have seen instances of turning, dermatologists into ICU doctors, with a worksheet, basically saying, here's some things to. And you still went to medical school, but Chris is asking, do you have any examples of clients or companies using TWI job safety, which I think is an interesting sort of twist on this, because a lot of people's work is changing one way or the other. Now,
yes, that's happening a lot in healthcare right now.
Having a ton in healthcare. You also have nurses coming back. I saw a friend in Malaysia who just posted 3,000 nurses just came out of retirement, which is, it depends on how long you were retired, how much retraining you're going to need,
right,
and how much you're going to get. Right. So you do need, and I've made this argument, even in companies take this out of, I had this conversation this morning, take it out of healthcare. You might have an IT group at a company that can't do much with their SAP stuff, but their collaboration tools with everybody working from home needs more support. So can you take 3 resources from one team and move them over to the other very quickly and adjust? And so,
and there's some of that happening in healthcare where clinics are being closed down, operating rooms are being shut down to free up resources and supplies for the ICU and for COVID patients. But there are opportunities to redeploy people within healthcare that way as well.
Yep.
So there's a lot of change happening right now. TWI, to Chris's question, would be a great way to help train people up, like not bring someone in off the street, but
right,
to laterally sort of transfer within healthcare. There are nursing journal articles going back to the mid-1940s about TWI, or training within industry, being used to train new nurses and to train people in healthcare. Patrick Grout from the TWI Institute put out a really good video where he was using TWI methods to train his teenage daughter how to do proper hand washing. Mm-hmm. Point out the key points of why you should wipe your hands for 20 seconds and why you should wipe in certain ways. There are big opportunities to use TWI or lean methods, but I think the one concern I have about what's going on in healthcare is that everyone gets into crisis mode and they fall back to what they're familiar with, which might be sort of top-down executives in a conference room writing protocols approach instead of engaging frontline staff. And they might say, oh, the frontline staff are too busy. Well, I'm sure you can find some people who are representatives of frontline staff to help develop some of these new processes. Because I've heard, unfortunately, examples where things didn't seem to be well thought through. And if that's the case, that's where Kaizen comes into play, to help people adjust as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see that. Now, some of that's based on, again, another conversation I've had is simply you might have actually changed from sitting in a conference room to going out and observing, but now you're on a stay-at-home work order, right? And so another conversation I've had is, how do you do direct observation or go to the Gemba in this environment? And I think there are solutions from posted cameras that you can watch to streaming from the person at the point of activity. We used to do videotaping of long activities back in the early to mid 90s, right? So there's ways to do this, and I think that's the number one aspect around these things is, requires an approach to say, what is the problem? How can we solve it? Not can we or can't we, right? That's like the wrong question to ask, is how can we? And that includes these things. Now, this is where, again, if I were, it's super hard to do because you're still 10 nurses short or 100 nurses short. But if you have new nurses coming in, you take either your best nurse or your second best nurse, and you use them to do the training of the inbound resources so that you have less variation and more capability with those additional resources. Maybe you keep the best nurse at point of activity to do the troubleshooting of the complex problems, but at least use your second best nurse to do that training within industry methodology to get the resources up to speed with a minimum amount of variation.
And you mentioned having to work remotely. I think that's been a big challenge for a lot of hospitals where, so it's for their own health and safety, that the internal process improvement people had been told to stay at home, to work from home.
Yep.
And that creates a lot of challenges of how do you stay engaged with people? How do you try to help facilitate process design or process improvement from a remote standpoint? It's possible, but I think it's also possible that the people who are actually at the hospital still in crisis mode are trying to be heroes, and the lean people might be at home developing training or learning or doing things that aren't bad, but might not be contributing as they possibly could to the actual crisis that's right in front of us.
Yep. And there has to be an effective way to do that. And you can't push all of it off down the road. So we do have another question that I think relates to this, right? Because you talk about what the lean resources are doing during this time if they can't be directly engaged. And I've talked with 10 groups in the last 2 weeks, and it's all over the map about how engaged they are, but almost none of them are at the point of activity right now. Right? That's for sure, and I think that's best. But one of the questions is, will the crisis naturally help companies to develop lean, putting companies in a tough position? Do you think it is possible some companies might adopt, create some lean? And I think that's interesting. I look back at 2001. I look back at 2009, and especially 2009. What tended to happen was companies that weren't already serious dropped out of it. Right? They closed up their lean teams and laid people off and cut their resources. The ones that were already really committed said, hey, let's use those resources over here. I do think we'll see some natural lean, right? Just the creativity and problem solving. I think we'll see some of that. But I don't think it'll lead to anything terribly lasting. I think some companies will get more focused on their purpose, on their culture, on their way of working coming out of this. They'll be more committed with what they have left. Others will be scrambling and doing whatever they can to survive, and they won't be productive actions usually. They'll be panicky steps. So I do think you'll see a change, but I think you'll see some strengthen, some weaken or disappear.
Yeah, I mean, to answer Bradley's question, I mean, it's possible, but I think if you go back even further, looking at Toyota, I want to come back and touch on something else Bradley commented about Toyota. In Japan, post-World War II, and even Japan today, not every company is Toyota. So, I mean, we say, well, people should use lean. Well, there's a long history where we could say that, and it hasn't necessarily been the case. So yeah, some organizations will rise to the challenge, and they'll respond in different ways. But coming back to what Bradley posted, if I did look this up earlier today, Bradley mentions that he saw Toyota is using their people to do charity work. Haven't heard much about them doing training or improvements, but I know many companies are laying people off. So when Toyota shut down for 2 weeks, at least I'd read about this in Kentucky, Toyota made clear that nobody was being laid off, that people were going to be paid during that production downtime. So it's a combination. People probably aren't out buying cars in the middle of this, and there's the health and safety concerns. But Toyota has a long and I think admirable track record of not laying off full-time employees when they've been in a production downturn, going back to 2009, going back to when the tsunami hit, which was 2014. It knocked some suppliers offline in Japan. And at that time, Toyota and GM were both forced to shut down production. GM put employees on short-term layoff. Toyota said, no, we're going to pay people. And they have that commitment. And I remember at the time, both GM and Toyota had basically the same amount of money in the bank. So you couldn't make the case that post-bankruptcy although GM couldn't afford it. I think it's the difference in culture, and arguably that's one manifestation of the respect for people approach.
Yep. And confidence. I think that's the other aspect. It's not just, I think, it's a byproduct of it, but it's the ability to control your destiny, right? And the ability to manage yourself, manage your resources, solve the problems in front of you, even if you don't know what the next one is. I think when you don't have confidence in your ability to do that, then you're more likely to panic. When you do have confidence in your capabilities as a whole company, you're more willing to see your way through it. And I think we're going to see some of that, particularly in the smaller company world in the coming months. We have these loans coming out from the government. Now they're announced, right? Nobody, I don't think anybody's gotten any money yet. And I've done some research on this. Where, on average, even the express loans that SBA offered, which could be approved in 36 hours, still took up to a month for a bank to decide to give you the money. And that was before we had 100-fold increase in demand, to 1,000-fold increase, right? I mean, every small business is analyzing right now. I have 5 emails from various accountants who are doing webinars in the next 2 days about, how do you get your money? So no way this money comes out soon. The question then is, do companies have the confidence in their ability to come back or to survive, to bother hanging on to their people? Whether they have the cash or not, you do what you need to do, right? I have no problems with people that are making the choice between reduced hours and pay plus healthcare in order to survive, right? But that's still a decision of confidence in you and your ability as a company to come back.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see a lot of this. Kevin Miller and I were kind of joking online about
Kevin Meyer,
yeah. Sorry. About the Business Roundtable had announced last year that business is not just about profit; it's about all stakeholders, right? And it feels like the universe just said, "Okay, prove it." Right. And this is companies' chance to prove it, right? It's not why we have this, but in the end, there'll be companies that their culture is stronger because they did prove it. And their employees saw that. And we saw that in companies in 2009 where, people left because they thought the company was small or whatever, but then they were the ones helping employees out where others weren't. And those people came back and stayed, right? Because of what happened there. So,
yeah. So I'm going to do some research. It'll be interesting to see if the Detroit automakers respond the way they usually do, which is laying people off. Tesla was an interesting case. I want to see what they've decided, but they really fought Alameda County for days. Alameda County had a shelter-in-place order, non-essential businesses have to shut down. Like auto repair, auto parts. I imagine more like your car repair shops were considered essential service, and Tesla apparently interpreted car assembly as being an essential service, which is debatable. Okay, wait a minute, is that really what the law meant? And so then they finally announced, after a lot of pressure and visits from the Alameda sheriff, all right, we're going to shut down, but it's going to take 4 days. Like they produced over the weekend. And I'm going to ask you, Jamie, does it really take 4 days to shut down an auto plant in a controlled way?
No, not at all.
I don't think so.
It takes, and I'll be honest with this, because I was running one, and we had a suspect power system, and we occasionally got shut down unplanned, and that was not an orderly way. And half the robots forget where they are, and it takes hours and hours to get back up to speed. But basically, we asked for sort of some advanced warning, and within 15 minutes, we could shut down in an orderly way. Now, not in an optimized way, not in a way that preserved cash, like we don't have any parts in the building we don't need.
Right.
We could do it in 15 minutes. If we got the notice, we could say, okay, put everything where it needs to be, get everybody where they need to be, get all the systems orderly, and then flip the switch, and you're down. And it's really not that hard. It's complicated, but it's really not that hard. So.
Yeah, the critics were saying that Elon Musk was just trying to squeeze every last bit of production out the door. They just launched the Model Y, so this is a particularly bad time. I think I saw my first Model Y actually in the parking garage of our condo building earlier today. So I guess somebody was taking delivery of a new vehicle during this time.
Somebody must have. I've not consumed a lot of miles on any of my cars, so it's that I don't know his motivation, and I'm not going to pretend to guess, but there's no way they needed 4 days to shut down. That I know for sure.
So I have another question here. Chris sort of pointed at me, but we'll see what you think about metrics here, Jamie. He was asking, do you have any views on how we're managing the COVID outbreak from a metrics perspective? Are we looking at the right data in the right way and responding appropriately? So I've got a couple first thoughts on that. For one, anytime you see a chart or a number on the TV screen or somewhere that says number of cases, you should translate that in your head. This is the engineer in me, gets really pedantic and specific. That really means the number of cases confirmed by laboratory testing. Mm-hmm. So we know the number of cases is much higher than the number of cases confirmed by testing. So that's the first data integrity measurement error problem. But then I think the second thing that always irritates me is when, let's say CNN, it almost starts looking like Sports Center, where they're putting stats and scores on screen, and you see a single number, or you see a couple of like just snapshot instantaneous moments. How many cases worldwide? How many deaths worldwide? How many cases in the US? How many deaths in the US? And I think back to what my mentor Don Wheeler would say. Data without context have no meaning. Or we could even add a corollary that says, one data point is not a trend. Or so, well, the number of cases is up this much from yesterday. Well, 2 data points is not a trend. But when you draw a run chart and you see that terrifying exponential curve, I think as always, like a chart with many, many data points tells us much more than 1 or 2 data points ever could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. My answer to this is a little different in the sense, we pointed at you because you have the book on metrics, but which is back there in the background since we are on video now. But my answer on this is really about not are we, but who. There we go. But who is using the metrics, right? So to me, that's the main point. I am not just confident in my mathematical skills. I'm cocky about my mathematical skills. And yet,
MIT.
I did go to MIT, but I was cocky before that.
Bradley High too.
Well, I'll do that. It was before that too. And my professor used to claim he taught calculus for a living. You cannot do calculus in your head. I kept proving him wrong. He did not like that. But but fundamentally, despite my confidence in my mathematical skills, I do not try to draw conclusions by looking at worldometer, right? I do not, because there's so much more nuance in building mathematical models. There's so many more variables, testing rates, underlying conditions, hospital utilization rates, localization rates, concentration rates. There's 1,001 variables to model anything this complex. And so I listen to when the scientists and the mathematicians say some of the same things, then I have a little more confidence in that. But in the end, besides how much whiskey to drink each night, what's the data informing me of anyway? Right? So I get some bad news about the data. What do I do? The data's clear. Shelter in place. Right? There's no other conclusion that 99.99% of Americans, let's just assume those are the ones listening, need to make based on the data. So stop, I don't want to say stop looking at the data. It's interesting. It's good to be informed. Same reason you watch the news. I have no problems with any of that. It doesn't mean you should draw conclusions from any of it, right? People have to craft the mathematical models and the data to suit their needs, and if they're in a position of making decisions. Right now, again, I'm not in a position of making decisions. I am home. I'm not leaving. And so the data is good one day and bad the next. And other than, a little emotional adjustment, that's it. Yeah. So I do believe, and I believe this wholeheartedly because I see this on Facebook and LinkedIn and other places. We should all stop making amateur conclusions based on a couple of data points that we read in the paper or that we see online or that we look on Worldometer or something like that. We've just got to stop.
I would extend that point to say anybody who's a leader in any workplace, please stop making amateur assessments based off of one or two data points in your workplace as well.
Yes, which is, if not the thesis of your book, one of them.
But here, I'm going to show, since on video here, you thought this was my book in the background, right?
I did. It was way too far away, though.
Right. So actually, it's something we bought at a local farmer's market. So here's the book again. Gratuitous plug, Measures of Success. This is not as shiny.
Oh, there you go.
If you think good engineering is costly and time consuming, try bad engineering.
Which bad data management does some of the same problems.
Yeah, I could extend the same thought to the new process development that's happening in crisis mode at hospitals and clinics to deal with COVID-19. If you think good process design is costly and time consuming, try bad process design.
Yep.
It's my reminder hanging up here in the office. This kind of old-timey looking sign, but I can see why you thought at a distance why they looked similar enough. I didn't.
Yeah, I think it was just the color scheme threw me, and perhaps an assumption that you're, in your Dallas office, I'm used to seeing your book covers behind you up on the wall, which is
you have that in the background there.
A nice touch. I have one way back there.
So Hitchhiker's Guide on your shelf.
Hitchhiker's Guide's way back there, but that's the closest you can see.
And what's that say on your whiteboard?
That says cheers.
Cheers.
With my 15-second version of a whiskey glass with some whiteboard markers. So
that's good.
Keep seeing this whiteboard over my head when I'm on video calls, and thought it could use a message or two from now.
And you use that when you do training videos, right?
I use it for training videos occasionally, but honestly, I use it more myself for my own purposes.
Really? Okay.
I like when I'm thinking big thoughts, when I'm working on big stuff. I like big paper to brainstorm on. I believe the constraint of paper should not be, or a screen should contain our ideas. So when I'm working on something big, I use that. The other time I use it, I do have some meetings here occasionally, not right now. But I always do best with a whiteboard in the room. And so here in my office, as soon as I built this, one of the first things that needed to go up was a whiteboard. So yeah, it's come in handy for multiple purposes.
Yeah. So I'm going to suggest maybe one last topic before we wrap up, and we don't have a hard cutoff. It's not like YouTube runs out of storage space, but people have been with us almost an hour, and thank you for being part of this experiment. But one thing we're going to talk about was, we're now home a lot more, and like when we're traveling, sometimes funny things happen. But Jamie, maybe I'll ask you to go first. What funny thing has happened to you during this quarantine, stay-at-home, shelter-in-place environment?
Yeah, so, and I'm not sure it always happens to me. My life has been pretty blessed, honestly. I have enough space to spread out in. My nearest neighbor is a couple hundred yards away. When I go for a walk, I can see, nice horizons. My life is honestly pretty damn nice relative to what other people are suffering through. But having everybody here all the time, and especially with multiple weeks with no school to do, in addition to the inability to leave, are finding ways to be entertained, knowing that we would be together for a long time has been the challenge. Some of it has been a challenge of aligning up moods, right? So I'm in the mood for a movie. Well, I'm not. Yeah. I'm in the mood to do this. I'm not. So it hasn't always worked. But our living room is now a 4. Is design build-offs, right? So they get and so we've enjoyed that show. I'm not entirely sure why. I don't enjoy a lot of those reality shows, but it's been fun. It's just Legos, right? It's pretty cool stuff. So we've decided to have a family competition. So we're 3 rounds into it. Every Saturday we've had 2-hour builds. We did monsters the first round. We did architecture the second. We did cars the third. And everybody in the family, we have all the kids' Legos apart in one room. We're building in another. And we have a we have a build competition. And it's pretty intense. It's 2 hours of focused building. And then we judge each other. Wow. And we have a running tally to see how everybody's doing. And it's not something I ever thought we would do, but we've so far consumed about 6 hours with this. And we're already planning for next weekend.
So I had some internet problems because maybe too many people were starting to stream shows like Lego Masters on the internet. But I'll go back and listen to the recording and hear the whole story, Jamie. But one other thing, you talked about, and we're both blessed and fortunate. And it's good to recognize that. But I was going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot, Jamie, because you had posted an offer online to help others. And I thought I'd ask you to share that here in the podcast.
Yeah, well, I've actually made 2 specific offers. One is my online training. So I have a private platform that I do video training through that I normally sell company subscriptions for them to use as they want. So I've made the offer that anyone can sign up for 2 free courses, basically during the length of this crisis, so that they can educate themselves while they're at home. So we had so many people take us up on that we've had to increase our subscription for the number of users, and I'm happy to do that. So that's one offer I've made. The other, which I've been glad people have taken me up on, is small businesses are struggling. Average days on hand of cash is 28 days for a small business. And so I've offered to provide just whatever advice I can help them think through how to either survive or set themselves up for the long term through this crisis. And that's free of charge as well. And so I've had several people take me up on that, and hard conversations, because they're usually fairly dire, but hopefully productive conversations. And that'll certainly extend for the duration of this crisis as well.
Well, thank you for offering that. And then if someone's watching or listening, how do you suggest they reach out to you? They can find you on LinkedIn.
They can, and I'll put I'll put a post up, a link to the post about the free training, but either through the jflinch.com website or directly on LinkedIn. For either one of those is fine.
Okay. And one thing I've been trying to do, next week, I'm going to be starting a book club around my book, Measures of Success. And I think at this point that may be full for the size of being able to do an interactive group. But I would invite anybody, if you've been reading the book and you have questions, or if you want any sort of coaching around process behavior charts, feel free to reach out. Would love to help if that means reviewing a chart or two, or talking through your application of this. You can also contact me through the markgraban.com website, or just email me, mark@markgraban.com. That's one thing I've been trying to do.
Yeah, and the other thing that you've done, which I think is great, it was interesting to see how aligned everybody was in some of their thinking, was offering sort of a support group for the independent lean consultants out there. And you're far more connected to that community than I am. But you've had a couple of lean coffee chats with people that are independent lean consultants out there, working, trying to make a living doing this. Now, for the most part, although we've heard some exceptions to this that were largely just fortuitous in their design, but most people are reduced, if not shut down, in their work. And there's a lot of people that are sort of independent resources, and whether they're artists or chefs or lean consultants that are, they're not unemployed, but they're not working like they used to. And so you've supported that with a bit of a support group for engaging and talking about how we manage our way through that.
Yeah, and we've done a couple of Zoom group chats with a small group. And the one thing I would invite to anybody watching or listening is, on LinkedIn, I started a group with the same name, Independent Consultants Stuck at Home. And that group on LinkedIn is not limited to lean consultants, because there are a lot of people in adjacent fields or different fields who are in that same situation, where we can't travel, we can't go to our clients, we might be able to do a little bit, but there's been a big drop off in revenue. So that is something that hopefully helps people make new connections and learn from each other. But before we wrap up, can I tell my
Yeah, tell your funny story, and then we'll close it on out.
And I should have brought this dang trash can in here
to show,
visualize or recreate the moment. But in our kitchen, we've got one of these trash cans. We bought it at Costco, where it's hands-free. You wave your hand and it goes, and the black plastic lid goes up, and then a timer and the lights blink down, and then it closes. So I was making eggs one morning, and my wife would have loved to actually have witnessed this. She would have laughed, rightfully so. So I was making some eggs. So I cracked one egg into a bowl and went to go throw the egg away. So you got egg on your hand, you just kind of wave your elbow, and it goes, I threw the egg in the trash can. And that stays up for this period of time. And then I cracked the second egg, and I go to throw the egg in the trash can, and sure enough, right as I'm throwing the egg, the lid goes down. It blocks my shot. It probably would have given me a Matumbo finger wave if it could. And so then, because there was a gap between the trash can and the counter, I go down to pick up this eggshell, which is now on the ground. As I lean over the trash can, here's my head, and the lid goes, apparently I triggered the sensor. And it goes up and it smacks me in the head. So thankfully, it's a fairly light piece of plastic.
Yes.
Still. First, for a very split second, I was mad at the trash can, and then I saw the humor of it.
I can see being mad at the trash can, but I do like to be able to control my appliances on my own free will. So
never had I think Bruce Hamilton and Toast Kaizen, we've never had a toaster smack us in the head.
Not yet. It might be coming. Well, this was fun. Again, we were going to do a lean whiskey anyway, so we at least got the technology right. It seems to have worked, and we had people chatting and providing us some questions.
We had viewers. We had a non-zero number of viewers. We had a non-zero number of questions.
And zero, other than perhaps one bandwidth glitch, which we probably would have had anyway. Zero technology failures. So that's a win in its own right, because even our old method, we've suffered from some of that. So
I knew that was the biggest risk, and thankfully it was like 55 minutes into the episode before that happened. So thank you to people who tuned in, or people who might be watching or listening to the recording. I guess like with any experiment, we'll evaluate, is this worth doing again, right?
Absolutely. Well, we always will.
Won't put you on the spot, but we'll figure that out. But I do want to invite people. This is our 15th episode, so if you want to catch up on any of the other previous episodes, last time Jamie and I talked about the idea of not blaming just in time for supply chain problems. We were really at the time thinking about manufacturing supply chains. Now it's sadly the healthcare supply chains.
Yep.
But you can find past episodes through my website. You can go and enter leanwhiskey.com into your browser. You can spell whiskey either the Canadian style or the Scotch style or the American style, whiskey with a K-E-Y or a K-Y at the end. You can also go directly to leanblog.org/leanwhiskey, which you do have to spell K-E-Y. I'm going to jot that down. I need to fix that so you can spell it both ways. And Jamie, on your website?
Yep, jflinch.com/leanwhiskey.
So I would invite you, hopefully if you enjoy the content, I mean, if you don't like the whiskey talk, you can always kind of skip through the first 10 or 15 minutes of the episode. There's a Venn diagram of people who are interested in both lean and whiskey, and we're catching that small intersection.
Yeah, it might be bigger than you think, but we are catching that intersection.
We have a non-zero number of listeners each time, but we would ask you to subscribe to us either through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts.
Yeah, and please do rate us, review us, subscribe. It really does help us. I think those that know us know that we try to be lean thinkers. We certainly practice continuous improvement, and so the feedback alone is always very valuable and helps other people find the podcast as well. So we appreciate any of those actions.
Yeah. So with that, I guess we can hold our glasses up to the video.
Absolutely.
Give kind of a virtual clink.
Cheers.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.